Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
In the last days of May 1940, the fate of Britain, indeed the outcome of the Second World War, depended on 2 things. One was the division between Churchill and Halifax. The other was the destiny of the British Army crowding back into Dunkirk. And that's also a quote from John Lucas's book, 5 Days in May, which we've been referencing a few times, haven't we, Al?
Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland. And this episode, our last episode was a day of prayer. And by the way, some of you may have noticed that slight difference in audio quality between the start of the episode and the end of it. That's because of tangled schedules, me popping up in Birmingham and having to record on a laptop that seems to be involved in some sort of death pact with itself. And
yeah, it's on the way out, isn't it, that laptop? Just get yourself a MacBook Air and you'll be sorted.
It's trying to let me know, that laptop, that it's had it. It's like when a dog goes out and lies under a tree in the garden.
I'm prepared to keep going for you, mate, but
exactly.
I've got to say, there's not much legs left in me.
Exactly.
He's a bit wheezy, isn't he?
Exactly, a bit wheezy. Exactly, that's exactly it.
The back's bending, the spine's not as tall as it once was.
Precisely. So if you enjoyed our day of prayer in our previous episode, today is our cheerily entitled Black Monday. Now, as someone who dubbed a day Black Tuesday, we don't just dole out these black...
No, they've got to be earned.
...descriptions, they've got to be earned. And... What's interesting is, particularly in the last episode, the thing I think we were really trying to get up close to is how on earth did this feel at the time? How on earth are the decisions being made? What's the thinking? And what must it have been like? You were being a bit
simpatico to Halifax.
Well, you know what? Up to a point. No, up to the point where he says we can do a deal with Hitler. Everything he says makes complete sense within his frame of reference and within the situation the British are actually in, I think, up to that one point where he goes, and we'll be able to strike a deal with the dictators. And that's where, no, he's plain wrong. He's plain wrong. And if you're going to pin all the rest of it on being able to do a deal, forget it. Right.
This is where Chamberlain comes in, I think.
Well, this is where Chamberlain comes in because he knows perfectly well this is impossible. And I think this is, if you just parse Chamberlain through the failure of appeasement, and after all, and again, we're using that word with strong advisement, right? Maybe appeasement did fail, but what's the lesson Chamberlain has learned from appeasement that he brings to bear at this absolutely critical juncture? And it's that you can't do a deal with these people. It's impossible. Yeah. Maybe he's learned this lesson too late. But the point is he has certainly learned it.
Yeah.
And he's happy to lean in and help Churchill out because that's the thing Churchill always said was the case. And so I'm not simpatico with Halifax, but I completely see where he's coming from, particularly having been Viceroy of India. And there's this idea that the empire will pull to us. That's very much Churchill's sentimental notion. Halifax knows exactly how difficult that would be in India.
Yes, and the other thing is also he's not a flamboyant character under any stretch of the imagination, and he doesn't like the kind of Churchillian romantic rhetoric and the kind of, sort of tugging on the heartstrings. For him, it's just pragmatism. So that, you know, they're coming at it from completely different psychological perspectives as well.
Yeah.
Be that as it may, what's going on in Berlin? Well, there's an American journalist there called William Shirek, and he reports that on that morning that Calais has fallen. He notes on the 26th of May, Britain is now cut off from the continent. And there's even reports in the Völkischer Beobachter, which is the Nazi daily news sheet, that the Luftwaffe have been bombing southeast England, which hasn't really. But the halt order is finally lifted.
Yes.
At 1:30 p.m. on the 26th. But that doesn't mean that they're all suddenly, 1:32, they're all off.
Yes.
Not a bit of it. Because it's not until 8 p.m. that night that Panzer Group Kleist is finally given operational orders, and they're not going to begin till the morning of the 27th. So in other words, they've been idle for 3 whole days doing diddly squat. And 3 whole days is a flipping long time in this campaign.
Yeah, well, given what's happened in a fortnight, 3 days is a sizable portion of time, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, it really, really is. And by that time, in those 3 days, Gort's men, as well as the French, have been organised and dung it along the canal line. This is the Bergu Canal, which goes, Furness Canal, which goes all the way, round the perimeter of Dunkirk, about kind of 5 miles inland. It's changed very unfavourably for the Germans. 4 British and several French divisions have reached Dunkirk in that time. And that morning, on the 27th of May, the renewed attack kicks off, but it soon bogs down. And the reason it bogs down is because they're in this flat area, it's completely flat as a board there.
Yeah.
And the sluice gates have been opened by the British, and the fields around on the German side of the Bergus-Furnes Canal and on the other side are now waterlogged.
Yeah.
Which means you can still go around the causeways, but you can't kind of do mass panzer attacks.
Yeah, and they've had time to prepare their positions and everything. So, it's not the sort of improvised scratch defences that have been in place up to this point in the campaign, with them basically cascading back.
General Holder, who is the Chief of Staff of the Army, who keeps his brilliant diary, that on the left wing, von Kleist seemed to encounter stronger resistance than expected. He's absolutely steaming about this.
Yeah.
And well, he might be.
Yeah.
Have the Germans just blown it? Well, it doesn't seem that way to the British on the Monday the 27th, I can assure you.
No, of course not.
It seems like the Germans hold all the aces.
Yeah. What has happened in the meantime, those Dynamos underway. At this point isn't the miracle of Dunkirk, not yet. It hasn't happened yet. That's named after the office it's commanded from, isn't it?
There is a room where there used to be a dynamo.
Literally, so it's literally named after the room it's being planned from, where there was literally a dynamo. I mean, the thing is the Royal Navy have been extricating themselves from Norway, after all, because the previous campaign to this...
Well, they're still there. They're still fighting. No, the Norway campaign
still there fighting. Yeah.
Up in Narvik.
Actually, if you get the balance sheet out, is a fantastic victory for the Royal Navy. And yes, it's a disaster for the army, and it's the thing that results in Chamberlain's enforced retirement as Prime Minister. It's been a great hunting time for the Royal Navy. They've done all sorts of damage to the Kriegsmarine.
Great success and catastrophic for the Kriegsmarine.
Yeah, completely catastrophic, the Kriegsmarine. Yeah.
And terrible for the German pre-war policy of building up a surface fleet, which is now lying wrecked. When clearly they should have been building ever larger numbers of U-boats, but they haven't done that. Which again is very much in Britain's favour, and they should bear that in mind when they're thinking about the perils of the future in the days and weeks to come.
Well, in essence, the Kriegsmarine offered the Royal Navy a chance to render them useless in the event of an attempt to invade, should there be one. Not that the Germans had that in mind, but they may have it in mind soon. And if you look at what happens in Norway, it's never going to be possible. I mean, it's interesting they've been blowing up port installations and fuel depots in Holland.
Yep.
They've brought Queen Wilhelmina back, who was at the prayer service, wasn't she? So
yes. And
they've been taking troops and supplies to France, because there's another deployment going into France, and then bringing them back to Britain too. So Cherbourg, Dieppe, Boulogne, Dunkirk, they've been lifting thousands of people out, 5,000 refugees and 3,000 troops on the 23rd of May, for example. And they're mine laying and mine sweeping, and they have coastal patrol work to carry out.
They've not been idle.
Not been idle. And one of the sort of security things the Royal Navy has to deal with is the coal going from the north to London.
East Coast convoys.
And so there's all these things that the Navy have got to do. And now they've got to turn their focus onto extricating the BEF. It's extraordinary what the Royal Navy got. It's a thrilling
time to be on a destroyer, though, don't you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If you're a young man and this is catnip, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that service personnel often say, you finally get to put the training to the test. finally get to do the thing I've been training for all this time and all that sort of stuff.
Anyway, background to Dynamo.
Well, this is interesting, is that on the 19th, Gort had warned, hadn't he, that the BEF might consider evacuation. It's quite early, isn't it?
Yep.
And the Admiralty immediately held a meeting to discuss that. And then enter the man of the hour.
All-time greats.
Yeah.
They decide that, after that meeting on the 19th, they decide that should it come to it, the Naval Subcommand of Dover, so there's all these commands, a bit like sort of 11 group, 10 group, 12 group in the RAF fighter command. There's also commands all around. There's Nor Command, there's Dover Command. So Dover Command, obviously, as its name suggests, covers the area of the southeast of England, that stretch of the coast, and that's Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay. He's not Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay at this point. He's comparatively junior in the big scheme of things. Representatives of the War Office, Movement Control and Ministry of Shipping had met Ramsay at Dover on the 20th to discuss the huge numbers of thorny issues involved in such an operation. This is not a straightforward undertaking by any stretch of the imagination, particularly not when you have to do it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So the first is that sleek destroyers and minesweepers that make up most of the Navy's ships are filled with guns and depth charges, and that's certainly not designed to carry large numbers of men. No, that's the truth of it. That also means, therefore you can use those, and you are going to cram the decks with men and down below and all the rest of it. But it also means drafting in merchant ships, fishing vessels, cross-channel ferries, pleasure boats, ferries and pleasure boats from elsewhere. The ferries that are doing the run from Liverpool to the Isle of Man, get them down to South Coast quickly. Yeah. And they do. They're ordered off straight away.
Yes, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
Isle of Wight ferries. They're all coalescing in Dover.
Those of our listeners who remember the Falklands War will remember that sort of sudden thing where ships were requisitioned to be taken south, cruise liners and all that sort of thing.
The QE2, painted grey.
Exactly, but it's that on absolute steroids, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
And they're also thinking, well, how are we going to lift these people off the beaches? That's the problem. They're imagining that the port's going to be under attack. It's going to be probably hammered, very difficult to get onto the quaysides. We're probably going to have to lift from the beaches. You can't do that with a destroyer because you're going to get in so close. So what that means is we're going to need little boats and, whalers and launches and stuff to go right onto the beach, ferry them back and forth. And that's why they're thinking, if we get 40,000 off, we'll be doing well.
Yeah.
It's because they don't think they're going to have a quayside or a series of quaysides from which to lift these people. That's the issue.
Entirely reasonable of them to think that as well, because if the Germans have figured out how they're going to stop getting men off, they're going to destroy the port properly, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and there's also the problem that Dunkirk coastline is riven with shoals. It's rarely more than a couple of fathoms deep, and is a notorious graveyard. So you can't think of a kind of worse place in which to have to lift 300,000 men.
Exactly,
it ain't going to happen.
Yeah. By the morning of the 27th of May, your notes here say the problems facing them on the 20th of May multiplied. But that's one way of putting it. It's like...
Yeah, it's like understatement, isn't it?
Ever so slight. Not just in terms of the sheer number of people they're going to have to try to lift. I just sort of think in this, you can slice this as what are the practical problems, but the political thing the pressure hanging over these officers, if you screw this up, even despite your best efforts, the enemy thwart you anyway. The ramifications of this are boggling, aren't they?
They really, really are. Anyway, at about 7:30 on the morning AM, 07:30, on the morning of the Monday, the 27th of May, Captain Bill Tenant reports to Admiral Ramsay. So this is about 13 hours after the 6:27 p.m. when Operation Dynamo goes into action. And up until 6 o'clock that night, that Sunday, the 26th of May, the day of prayer, Tenant has been Chief Staff Officer to the First Sea Lord at the Admiralty.
That's interesting.
So he's a desk squaller. He's a staff officer at the Admiralty in London.
Yeah.
But he's a navigation expert. So he was a navigator on HMS Renown of the World Tour of 1921 and a naval instructor at the Imperial Defence College before the war. So he's now in his 40s. And they go, oh, okay, you're a staff officer, but you know loads about navigation. That's what we're going to need here at Dunkirk. You better go and report to Admiral Ramsay. And from there, Ramsay says, right, you're going to go to Dunkirk and you'll organise the shore end of the evacuation as the SNO, the senior naval officer, on the beaches, where we reckon your navigation knowledge is going to be invaluable. So he goes, roger that, and packs a few things, and 8:25 p.m. on the 26th, he sets out first for Chatham and then goes on to Dover, and he reports to Ramsay at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, no, 9 o'clock in the morning. So I beg your pardon. Yeah, so it's 9 a.m. that he finally gets to Ramsay's headquarters. And these are, I don't know if you've ever been there, but these are a sort of series of tunnels sort of dug into the chalk hills. They're rather amazing. Originally done in the Napoleonic time and then expanded.
Yeah.
Ramsay his office has a window in a small iron balcony overlooking the channel. And once a cannon has been pointed from that room towards France. But from where they are, they can hear the guns.
Yeah.
They can hear the sounds of battle from across the channel. I mean, how sinister is that going to be? That's not going to make you sanguine, is it?
No. If you need reminders of the pressure, you can't look out to sea and take in the waves and have a moment of reflection, can you? If you can hear it going on the other side of the channel.
Yeah.
They basically work on the assumption that the port at Dunkirk has been smashed up so much they aren't going to be able to use it. So they're thinking it's a 10-mile stretch of beach to the east of the port, and that's what we're going to have to do. And because they've had to keep it secret, they can't put out a call for boats and volunteer crews until it starts. So you've got this necessary lag at the start of the evacuation that will happen. But I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
Yep.
On the morning of the 27th of May, only 129 of the Merchant Navy's 10,000 vessels are available. God, I mean...
You can see why they're not feeling particularly optimistic, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. And then they get bad news. Ramsay says to Tenant, the Boche has got as far as Gravelines. That's the worst blow yet. And this is the French gun position at Gravelines with the coast
They've
west
got
of
massive coastal guns there.
Huge guns. But with the coast west of Dunkirk now in German hands, it means that the short route from Dover to Dunkirk is within reach of these guns.
Which is only 39 miles.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how big are these guns? But basically the point is you can't go the quick way. So route Z, which is that shorter route.
40 coastal guns already operating from
Why
France.
have the French got coastal guns pointing in our direction, Jim? What's going on? I thought we were their allies.
Hey?
There's a couple of important questions that need answering here.
Yeah, but they might get attacked by the Kriegsmarine.
Yeah, next time Mr. Reynaud shows up, I think we need to just ask him quite what he was doing.
Anyway, so there's 3 routes. There's route Z. This is the 39-mile closest one. Then there's route X, which is 55 miles, but that hits the coast between Dunkirk and Gravelines. And then there's route Y, which is 87 miles long and involves a dogleg off Ostend and approaching from the east. So route Y passes through the minefield. So this is the 87-mile one. And route X is as yet untested. Both are going to have to be used. And that means that the crossings are going to take longer, a lot longer than they would if they were taking route Z, which is the 39-mile ones. Yeah. But coming out, what do you do?
I mean, it's hard steaming. 39 miles you can do that in a couple of hours, like 3 hours or so, if you really put your pedal to the metal.
Ramsay tells Tenant, if we do 45,000 men of BEF, we'll be doing well.
Crikey.
Yep. So accompanying Tenant are a team of 12 officers and 160 ratings. They're going to be, in charge of the shore parties, organising the men on the ground, getting them into boats, getting them, lifted off the beaches onto larger vessels waiting offshore. They leave Dover at 1:45 p.m. Briefing's complete, on the destroyer HMS Wolfhound, and they follow route Y. First Stukas attack them at 2:45 p.m. They're harried and bombed the rest of the way, although they do manage to dodge and weave their way out of trouble. And this comes to a bigger point, actually, which we can maybe discuss a little bit later. But above the din, Tenant begins organising his men. Each officer is going to have 12 ratings, given a stretch of the beaches, part of the port to reconnoitre and manage. He's trying to be kind of methodical about it. As they draw near Dunkirk, it's just this vision of hell. The entire coastline seems to be ablaze because the oil refineries at St. Paul, just southeast of Dunkirk, they're burning. So huge pool of thick black smoke is kind of billowing up into the sky. And this is one of the things about Dunkirk in this period, that it may be the last week of May, but it feels wintry because the whole sky is covered. First of all, by a windless bank of low pressure, creating 10-tenths cloud, but exacerbated by this incredibly thick pool of black smoke, which just burns the whole week pretty much until the Saturday, the 2nd of June. Flames spewing from the warehouses and buildings around the port, above aircraft are thundering over, bombs whistling down, explosions, as they're hitting the ground, guns booming. They finally pull into Dunkirk harbour at 5:35 p.m. Miraculously intact. They do actually get to a quayside as another stick of bombs falls on the quayside nearby. I mean, crikey. And it's only once the raiders have passed does Tenant, they disembark and start dispersing his men. And then he heads off towards Bastion 32, which is still there. It's a sort of, huge, great bunker. And this is the headquarters of Admiral Jean-Marie Charles Abrial, who is the French Admiral Nord, the Admiral of the North, the naval commander at Dunkirk. So they kind of pick their way through the rubble and shards of broken glass and burnt out vehicles and snapped tram wires, and eventually reach Bastion 32, where they're led through heavy steel doors into a kind of long, damp corridor lit by candles. Just amazing. That takes him to the operations room. And here he finally meets with Brigadier Reginald Parmiter. I mean, God, that's a old school British Army name if ever there was one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Name's Parmiter, Reginald Parmiter.
Jolly good.
Who's from Gort's staff.
Yep.
Colonel G.P.H. Whitfield, who's the area commandant. And Commander H.P. Henderson, the British Naval Liaison Officer to Admiral Abriel. And they all say the same thing. There's absolutely no chance at all of using the harbour for evacuation.
Yeah.
And Tenant goes, well, how long do you reckon we've got? And they go, well, 24, 36 hours at the most. And after that, the Germans will be here.
One question I have is, who has ultimate authority in this situation? Is it Tenant?
Well, this becomes a debating point because Gort has, part of the alliance is that Gort has a right of veto. So he's under the orders of the French, but can kind of, refer back if he needs to. And Tenant's in the same situation, that his commander, his command is, they want cooperation with the French, but they're separate from the French.
Right. Okay. Yes, you can see that possibly.
He is a guest at Abriel's Bastion, put it that way.
Good Lord. But when it comes to dealing with the army, is it a situation that goes, well, this is how we're going to do it, and then the army have to go along with it?
This is a naval operation.
So he has full authority.
Yep.
Because, a captain's what a colonel, isn't it? If you're...
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And there he is dealing with brigadiers and so on, and yet it's actually him that's going to call the shots, isn't it?
Yeah.
In effect.
Dynamo is a British Royal Navy operation. It's not an army operation.
Yeah. In the meantime, the Luftwaffe are trying to do what Goering has promised the Führer. They've hit the port with 30,000 incendiary bombs, more than 15,000 high explosives. They've destroyed the railhead, pretty much, and the docks and quays are in ruins.
Water supply's been cut off, which is disastrous for the men.
That's very bad.
Because everyone's short of water.
But this is interesting, isn't it? Because this is what Goering's plan. It's the thing that's bolstered Hitler's political situation with the army. But it's interesting that they have started their operations immediately, but the Luftwaffe is pretty thinly spread, actually.
Yeah, it is, because it's got a long way to come.
It's got a long way to come. It's also still engaged in tactical operations supporting the German army.
Well, I think it's really important to stress that the airfields in which they're operating, they're still back in Germany. They're miles away.
So it's harder work. So you end up with, it's Kessering's Luftflotte, but what you end up with is on the 25th, von Kluge meets with Wolfram von Richthofen. I wonder how he got the job. Who's the commander of 8th Fliegerkorps. I mean, a family name gets you a long way, doesn't it? And he asks sarcastically whether he'd yet taken Dunkirk. And von Richthofen replies, "No, Herr General Oberst, I have not even attacked it yet. My Stukas are too far back. The approach flight's too long. Consequently, I use them twice a day at most, and unable to focus them at one point of effort." I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Goering consistently throughout the Second World War, and thank goodness for this, writes checks he simply can't cash with the Luftwaffe, doesn't he? This is a prime example.
Son, your body's writing checks your body can't cash, to quote Top Gun.
Exactly. And the weather, as you said is really, really bad. And we know that accurate bombing is hard. I think if you've listened to this podcast a lot, you know that basically no one can bomb accurately much with any degree of reliability. And this is early on in the war.
Yes, and the thing about Stukas is Stukas are starting their dive at, 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet. That's still quite high up.
Yeah.
And from 6,000 feet, a destroyer, which is not terribly long. What's a destroyer in length? Like 120 meters, something like that?
Yeah.
They look like a pencil.
And they're narrow.
And they're moving around all over the place. And, you will only hit a destroyer by chance. I mean, you can increase those chances, but it's a fluke shot if you hit it. So it's incredibly difficult. And so, and they're also pumping out vast amounts of anti-aircraft fire. And
by this stage, the Luftwaffe, since the campaign, and we talked about it's only been a fortnight, really, they've lost 1,000 aircraft since the campaign began. That is, this is one of the things we said earlier on about how Blitzkrieg works, is it's really costly and you have to push on through the cost. But the idea is you get it over with.
Worst single day for the Luftwaffe in the entire war is the 10th of May, 1940. They lose 352 aircraft. 352 in one day.
That is absolutely diabolical.
Yep, most of them transports.
Yeah, and yet the great takeaway, of course, on the Allied side is that the Luftwaffe are absolutely brilliant, have a great campaign. But the Germans are still optimistic and Goering again. He goes to visit the Führer later that day. He's in a jovial mood and confident his Luftwaffe was doing everything he had promised it could. And what does he say, Jim?
Only fishing boats are coming over. I hope the Tommies are good swimmers.
Yes, Feldmarschall.
That's a good one, Herman.
And so on. But I think what's interesting, though, is...
I'm quite pleased with my jovial Goering, actually.
I like it. I like it.
It's quite strong. I can add that to my repertoire along with
It's like he's in the room.
It's like he's in the room. You do Churchill, I'll do Goering.
Okay, brilliant. I think I'm satisfied with that division of labour, I've got to say. But the thing is Goering's still living it up, isn't he? He's getting plenty of sleep. He's taking it easy, really, as is Hitler. They're not focused on it, perhaps in the way that British leaders are. On the night of the 26th, Neville Chamberlain has written in his diary, the blackest day of all. But we promised you Black Monday, which is the 27th, so...
Yes. So I think what we should do is take a break, shouldn't we? And then we should get into war cabinet meetings on Black Monday.
Brilliant. See you in a second.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Hello, I'm Gordon Carrera, national security journalist.
And I'm David McCloskey, CIA analyst turned spy novelist.
Together, we're the co-hosts of another Goalhanger show called The Rest is Classified, where we bring you the best stories from the world of secrets and spies.
We have just released a series on the decades-long battle between the CIA and Osama bin Laden, and this week we are stepping into the devastation of the 9/11 terror attacks to understand how Osama bin Laden was able to carry out such a plot right under the nose of the CIA.
It was a moment that changed global politics forever, shifting the focus of spy agencies away from nation states towards hunting for terrorists and understanding the extremist ideology that drove them.
We will then go into the decade-long manhunt for Osama bin Laden, which culminated in a dramatic raid at his compound in Pakistan in 2011, which killed the world's most wanted terrorist.
So if all of this sounds good, we've got a clip waiting for you at the end of the episode.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. Well,
it's Black Monday, people.
It's Black Monday, exactly. Yeah. If Chamberlain had a bad day yesterday, buckle up, Neville. There's worse to come. Things are obviously, for the BEF, looking absolutely diabolical. And they're pretty pessimistic, as we've seen that the assessment is you're not really going to get anyone. You're not going to be able to use the harbour. You're not going to get anyone off the beach much.
No.
It's all going to go pretty badly.
45,000 tops.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Churchill likes to recall quotations that match his mood in times of strain. I mean, the extent to which he lives through words and uses words.
It's just amazing.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It's so brilliant.
Particularly as he's an autodidact. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about Churchill, isn't it? Is that this whole body of literature that he's and words that he falls back on and then uses and re-engineers, because an awful lot of his rhetoric is sort of extraordinary stirred pot of recycled stuff. It's very interesting. The familiarity he has with classical texts is something he's done for himself. And I think that makes him and his understanding and use of words and rhetoric even more interesting. So he asks one of his secretaries to find a line from George Borrow's Prayer for England at Gibraltar. And
there's more praying.
You know, there are no atheists in foxholes. I think that's what this is, isn't it? This is the political foxhole that Churchill finds himself in. Fear not the result, for either shall thy end be majestic and an enviable one, or God shall perpetuate thy reign upon the waters. So that's basically shit or bust.
Yes, basically. I think it's fair to say he's going to need that kind of level of stoic resolve, isn't he, in the days to come?
Yeah.
Really, really important to remind us about that opening quote that we have from John Lukacs. You know, the fate of Britain, the fate of the Second World War, the fate of the free world depends not only on the successful evacuation of the BEF from the beaches of Dunkirk, it also rests on the outcome of the split between Churchill as Prime Minister and Lord of Halifax, most respected man in Britain, the Foreign Secretary. Also, much depends on Chamberlain, who influence is still absolutely enormous. And should Chamberlain emphatically side with Halifax in this debate, I think Churchill's going to find it very difficult to oppose both. That's the truth of it.
And Labour at this point are keeping stum, aren't they? They're letting the Tory...
Yeah, they're the new boys, and they kind of don't really feel it's their place to kind of butt in. But Chamberlain is already a sick man. The cancer is already taking hold of him, but he hasn't yet been diagnosed, so he doesn't know. Churchill has bent over backwards to be gracious, nice, kind, respectful. He's still bedding down in the Admiralty so that Chamberlain can stay in number 10 for the time being. All this is he hopes this will bear fruit when they have these difficult kind of conversations that they're going to have today.
Well, and also, I mean, it's worth remembering that when Churchill becomes Prime Minister, when he enters the House of Commons, he enters to silence. And when Chamberlain then turns up in the chamber, there are cheers. So he needs him for all these reasons. He needs him to stay in contact with the party and keep the party on side. Absolutely. If things don't pan out, that's going to be incredibly important. Whatever's going to happen next, that's incredibly important. And so, so the first war cabinet that day is at 11:30 at Downing Street. Do you imagine this scene? They begin with reports read out from France. So a sit-rep as what's going on in France. And then a discussion about what to tell the Dominions. This is all really bad, isn't it? And they know that the Australian High Commissioner is a defeatist, right? They know he's set to throw in the towel. They also know that things are terrible in Norway still. They were going to have to evacuate Narvik, which has been captured by an Anglo-French-Polish force 2 days before. But, that's going to have to go, isn't it? That's going to have to wither on the
They've got bigger fish to worry about right now.
Much bigger fish to fry. Chamberlain then gives his appraisal of the Chief of Staff's certain eventuality, which is the sort of kind of risk assessment that the Chiefs of Staff have drawn up as to what will probably happen if things do go completely wrong.
Yeah, and he points out that much depends on the United States. And he says, this was perhaps not an unjustifiable assumption, but we might not obtain this support in the immediate future. We might expect some help from America at some point, but it ain't happening this week.
Yeah, and that notably is part of Halifax's argument, as we saw in the last episode. A major factor in Halifax's argument. And Churchill, with his strategic sense and his grip on... Because Churchill's visited America a lot, of course. This is the other thing to remember, is he knows what America is, doesn't he? He's been there. He's seen it face to face, the American economy and what it's capable of.
Yeah. There's some debate over the figures that have come from the Air Ministry. So this is Group Captain Elmhurst figures of Luftwaffe strength of being kind of 4-1.
Yeah.
And it's actually now, Air Marshal Sir Richard Pearce has now produced new, more accurate figures, which suggest the advantage is more like 2.5-1 in favour of the Germans rather than 4-1.
Oh, that's all right then.
It still means that the British airmen got to shoot down 3 German aircraft for every one.
Yeah.
I'm suddenly feeling sort of Laurence Olivier in the Battle of Britain here. The simple arithmetic is that our young airmen will have to shoot down 3 of their young airmen for every one of ours. Anyway, at this point, Halifax is saying very little, but I think it's fair to say that the mood in the cabinet room that morning at number 10 is gloomy.
I mean, I expect you would say little. Those sound like his arguments being laid out. So he's thinking, I don't need to weigh in here.
I'll store this up for the moment.
It's all going in my direction.
They disperse for 1 o'clock, go off and have lunch, and then they come back. They reconvene at 3:30 p.m. on that fateful Monday, 27th of May. At 3:30, he has called for the third war cabinet of the day, which is going to be an hour's time. But at that moment, Churchill is alone in the cabinet room at the rear of number 10, reading through answers from the Chiefs of Staff and Vice Chiefs to questions that he'd asked them earlier that morning. Could the Royal Navy and the RAF hold out reasonable hopes of preventing a serious invasion attempt by the Germans? And could the various forces gathered in this island in the UK cope with raids from the air? The cabinet room has changed a little bit, but in 1940, in front of him at this central position, right in front of the marble fireplace with a picture of Walpole above it, there are letter racks, 7 wooden trays, a telephone, there's bookcases lining this panelled room. They're each bound with copies of Hansard, which, is the official records of the proceedings in Parliament. And out beyond is the garden, isn't it? That we were looking at just the other day. Calais has fallen, 3,500 men in the bag. Now comes the news that morning from the Belgian embassy that the King of the Belgians is almost certainly going to make a separate peace with Germany that day, that they're going to surrender. And these 2 hammer blows mean the likelihood of even 40,000 men of the BEF getting away is now further reduced. It is expected that the Germans will be overrunning Dunkirk at any minute. And so the chiefs and the vice chiefs have set out their responses in 11 very terse, typically British of that particular period paragraphs.
Yeah.
And basically they say this: so long as the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force remain in being, in inverted commas, they state they should be able to prevent Germany from carrying out a seaborne invasion. On the other hand, if the RAF is defeated, then the Navy could hold up an invasion for a time, but not for an indefinite period. If an invasion is then begun, however, coastal defences would be unable to prevent the enemy making a firm foothold. The crux of the matter is air power, whether the RAF can successfully defend the skies. The Luftwaffe, however, outnumbers the RAF, and so far has destroyed all other air force in its wake. On the other hand, Britain does have the first and only coordinated air defence system in the world. However, it hasn't been tested, so no one knows whether this is going to work. They hope it's going to work, but they don't know. And at present, RAF fighter planes are still operating over and being sent to France, where there is no air defence system of any note, and where they're fighting heroically and successfully, but also losing a large number as well. So this then is the really, really obvious dilemma. Do you send them to France now and risk them being shot down ahead of any inevitable air assault on Britain, or hold them back, as Cyril Newell, who's the head of the RAF, and Dowding, who is the Commander-in-Chief of RAF Fighter Command, the Defenders of Britain, have been urging? On the other hand, by operating over Dunkirk, Jim, they might improve the chances of the BEF.
The way this is all laid out, I'm just imagining the PowerPoint presentation where you click from the slide going,
and you're reading out the text you've written on the PowerPoint.
Exactly. If the Navy remains in being, we find. However, if it's not,
however, next slide.
However, next slide, and then you press the wrong button
with a silhouetted image of a sinking ship.
And then you go press the wrong button and go back. Hang on, I'm sorry. Sorry, the RAF have survived now again. Oh no, I got to move forward.
Oh my goodness me! But when you put it like that, it's quite a dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because, as we know, from what happened, the balance of probabilities is that's kind of how things worked out. That the RAF does remain in being and is able to defend the airspace, and then which means the Royal Navy will be able to do so successfully as well, and on and on and on. No one knows this at this moment.
No, and also no one knows, because another part of the question that Churchill has asked the Chiefs of Staff is can the British public put up with sustained bombing? And again, they don't really know. If bombers destroy much of the aircraft industry, then this would obviously then have a grave effect on Britain's chances. The moral effect of bombs raining down is also largely unknown because this has never happened before.
Yeah.
There's been bombers coming over London in 1917 and 1918 and stuff, but, not seriously.
Yeah.
Warsaw's been hammered, Rotterdam's been hammered.
Yeah.
There has never been a sustained bombing campaign on cities, ever.
But there's been a lot of writing about what it might amount to. An awful lot of journalism.
Yes, and it's all pretty apocalyptic.
Catastrophized. Yeah, exactly. Oh, God.
Their conclusions are stark and brutal. That Premier Thatcher, Germany has most of the cards.
Crikey.
The bottom line is, we're up the creek. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's not looking good. That's basically the conclusion.
Yeah, we're up the creek. Maybe we have a paddle or two. It's a shocker, isn't it? So Churchill knows that Monday, the 27th of May, is the potential to be the most calamitous time in the country's history. Full stop.
Yeah.
He did want to be Prime Minister, though. So, suck it up, mate. So there's a war cabinet at 4:30.
Yes.
And as they gather down and they sit at their places at the cabinet table, everyone knows exactly the situation they're in. And, this is the thing is militarily you can draw up that balance sheet. But the thing that balance sheet also says is we don't know. We don't know how morale, what the psychological and political effect of any of this is going to be. They just don't know. That in a way is the sort of thing that they're going to have to argue over after all, aren't they? They know what losing the BF will mean. They know it'll bring about a collapse. It could bring about a collapse of the government. I mean, America could go in either direction of that, couldn't it? Because the Americans don't want the Royal Navy in the hands of the Third Reich, a Britain that's a British Empire that's a satrap of the Third Reich. They don't want that. The empire would implode anyway, wouldn't it? The dominions would be, we're nothing to do with this anymore. All of those consequences. And, Hitler will have won and a new dark age will descend upon Europe. And then all the free world, and then actually all of the non-free world. That's the other thing. When you look at why Jamaicans come to fight, they say, well, we've got to get rid of Hitler and then we'll get rid of the empire. So it's consequences for everybody, isn't it?
Everyone knows what the stakes are. Everyone knows that this is possibly one of the most consequential meetings of British political leaders in the history of Britain, the history of Britain, full stop. I mean, this is it. This is the moment. It's 4:30 p.m, afternoon of Monday the 27th. For 6 men around the table. There's the Liberal leader, And the new Secretary of State for Air, Archibald Sinclair, he's been invited to join them, partly for his knowledge of the air situation, but also because Churchill knows he's absolutely with him and believing that any talks through the Italians are going to be disastrous. So the Prime Minister begins the session by raising Halifax's draft memorandum, suggested approach to Signor Mussolini, which they've now all read. He's got to confront this. He's got to kind of puncture this, face it. There has to be the confrontation. And Churchill says, and what we're going to do in the next 15, 20 minutes is read out verbatim what these players were saying at that cabinet meeting, that third cabinet meeting of the day. We've got the transcripts, the actual words they spoke.
And they very much speak for themselves.
But you're going to be Churchill, I'm going to be Halifax, I'll be Chamberlain, you can be Sinclair.
And if Goering should pop up, you can do him too. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thank you for your memorandum, Edward. But let me begin by suggesting it would be far more advantageous for us that if any approach to Signor Mussolini be made, then it be made by President Roosevelt rather than us making the first move via our French ally. If France collapses, Germany will probably give her good terms, but will expect the French to have the kind of ministers who are acceptable to the Germans.
Yeah, they all get what this means. This means that France would shift dramatically from being an ally and friend to becoming Britain's enemy.
Halifax replies,
I do not entirely disagree with regard to the French. My last message from Sir Percy Lorraine in Rome, that's the British ambassador in Rome, is to the effect that nothing we can do will be of any value at this stage, so far as Signor Mussolini is concerned. And it's now that Chamberlain speaks up. This seems clear. I suspect Mussolini might be willing to play a part in the game, but not until Paris has been taken. Yet, for the sake of the French, or rather, to avoid letting them down completely at this critical hour, it would be unfortunate if they were to add to this that we had been unwilling even to allow them the chance of negotiations with Italy.
Yeah. So Chamberlain is digging into this situation, yeah.
The issue is this, that as formal allies, France cannot begin any negotiations of their own without the agreement of the British, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And Churchill feels enormous sympathy for the French, but the danger is that by agreeing to Reynaud's request to begin talks with the Italians, Britain will then find themselves drawn into an armistice table through stealth, through the back door, effectively. And Churchill knows this can't happen. So if France begins talks, it must do so against British wishes, not with their blessing. So the time has now come to emphatically state his position. So the words he uses, the intonation, the framing of the sentences, these are all going to be critical. This is vital. And we've said that what an amazing wordsmith he is and how words are so important to him. There is no single point in his life where his words that he now speaks are going to be more important than now.
Neville, I believe your argument amounts to this, that nothing would come of the approach, but that it is worth doing to sweeten relations with a falling ally. Allow me to read a telegram I received earlier this morning from Monsieur Reynaud. The argument, which to his mind clearly carries the most weight, far more than the Italian business, is the assistance given by Britain to France at this tragic hour. This, he says, and I quote, will help to strengthen the alliance of hearts, which I believe to be essential.
And then Archibald Sinclair chips in.
I am convinced that an approach to Italy at this time would be futile. Being in a tight corner, any weakness on our part will encourage the Germans and the Italians, and will tend to undermine the morale both in this country and in the Dominions. The suggestion that we are prepared to barter away pieces of British territory will have a deplorable effect, and will make it difficult for us to continue the desperate struggle that faces us. I am, however, impressed by the importance of doing all we can to strengthen the hands of the French.
So Sinclair's sided with Churchill here, and Churchill's using the telegram from Reynaud, which is saying what we need is you to back us unequivocally, and that anything beyond that is surplus to requirements, and also bad form is the thing. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it, that even as the alliance has militarily gone completely down the plug hole, they're honouring all this stuff. It's others more cynical go, well, France has had it, they're toast, who cares?
Yeah. So anyway, so it's now the Labour men speak up. Greenwood's 60. He's a veteran Labour politician, former health minister in the last Labour government, and he's the son of a painter and decorator from Yorkshire. So unlike the aristocratic Halifax, his roots are firmly working class. And during the 30s, he's repeatedly been a harsh and outspoken critic of Chamberlain, and not least on the 2nd of December when he accused the then Prime Minister of vacillation over Germany's invasion of Poland. It's only the next day after that Chamberlain declares war. But now they're colleagues. So Greenwood says, well, I must say, I can see no way of France getting out of her difficulty. Yet we must bear in mind that if it got out that we had sued for terms at the cost of ceding British territory, the consequences will be terrible. With that in mind, it would be heading for disaster to go any further with these approaches. At this point, Churchill's sort of going, whew.
Yeah, Labour have been stum up to this point, haven't they?
Yes.
They've not said a thing.
And Halifax hasn't said a thing.
Well, yes, and Halifax hasn't said a thing until now. So all he's done up to this point is say what's happened with this conversation with Bastianini, the Italian ambassador to Britain. Bastianini's been hedging. He's not going to commit to anything. Yeah. He probably isn't allowed to. He's expressed his hope to find solutions satisfactory to both sides, which is nonsense, isn't it? And that the French are proposing nothing more than the most tentative of opening discussions. So then Halifax starts to lay his cards down, doesn't he?
I doubt there is very much force in the argument that we must do nothing which gives an appearance of weakness, since Signor Mussolini will know that President Roosevelt's approach has been prompted by us. He's got a point.
He's got a point, but it's interesting, though, that the weight of numbers is against him, isn't it? Sinclair and that Greenwood suddenly are going, well, we can't be doing any shabby deals.
But he also knows that by Churchill talking about doing any presentation via Roosevelt rather than them is just, it's kicking the can. It's a delaying tactic. He knows that. It's not a serious proposition for precisely the reasons he's just given. But also Churchill knows that he's got to now emphatically reject Halifax's suggested approach.
So he says, even if we are beaten, we should be no worse off than we should be if we are now to abandon the struggle. Let us therefore avoid being dragged down the slippery slope with France. The whole of this manoeuvre was intended to get us so deeply involved in negotiations that we should be unable to turn back. We have gone a long way already in our approach to Italy, but let us not allow Monsieur Reynaud to get us involved in a confused situation. The approach proposed is not only futile, but involves us in a deadly danger.
That's on the nose, isn't it?
You can see Halifax starting to sort of look a bit pinched and starting to fume. And Chamberlain speaks up again. He's clearly trying to be the arbitrator. And he suggests at this point that perhaps they ought to go a little further with the proposal just to keep up the appearance of alignment with the French. And then Churchill interjects. And this time it's about the fighting spirit of the French. And they might yet hold out. And even if the worst comes to worst, Churchill says it might not be the most terrible thing to go down fighting for the other countries already overcome by Nazi tyranny. And Churchill knows that Halifax is not one to be swayed by such talk. He's as we were discussing earlier on, Halifax is a pragmatist. He's clinical. He doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve. So the rhetoric is for the others. It's for Attlee. It's for Greenwood. It's for Sinclair, and even it's for Chamberlain. But Halifax now sits up. He's really getting cross. He points out with the kind of understatement he's known for that clearly profound differences and points of view are emerging. I cannot recognize any resemblance between the action which I am proposing and the suggestion that we are suing for terms and following a line which will lead us to disaster. And he points out that the previous day Churchill had agreed to discuss terms so long as Britain is able to emerge favorably. Now, however, he says, the Prime Minister seems to be suggesting that no conditions could be contemplated and that the only course left open is to fight to the finish. His exasperation is really, really clear now. And so he continues, if, however, it is possible to obtain a settlement that does not impair those conditions, I, for my part, doubt I am able to accept the view now being put forward by the Prime Minister. Winston, you have said that 2 or 3 months will show us whether we're able to stand up against the air risk. This means that the future of the country turns upon whether the enemy's bombs happen to hit our aircraft factories. I am prepared to take that risk if our independence is at risk, but if it is not at stake, then I think it is right to accept an offer which will save the country from avoidable disaster.
Gosh. When you hear it like that, I mean, goodness me. And then Churchill comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, that he says that there are no favourable terms to come from Hitler. Come on. We all know this. And I think Chamberlain is still trying to sort of mitigate, compromise, triangulate, isn't he? But they're getting further apart. The points of view are widening, so it's more difficult. He suggested if any concrete proposals are put forward, there'd be no difficulty in settling what were acceptable and what were not. But obviously, Churchill's just not going to buy that there are any acceptable conditions, is he? So that the arguments are beginning to sort themselves out, as Churchill would put it. So Halifax then says,
suppose the French government says, we are unable to deal with an offer made to France alone, and you must deal with the Allies together. Suppose Herr Hitler, being anxious to end the war through knowledge of his own internal weakness, offers terms to France and England. Would you be prepared, Winston, to discuss them? So Churchill pauses, lightly wraps his finger, between his cigar is still wedged, and then he speaks.
I would not join France in asking for terms, but if I were to be told what the terms offered are, then I would be prepared to consider them.
And it's noticeable how quiet Attlee, Greenwood and Sinclair have been. This clearly is a debate between two political titans. Halifax and Churchill, with Chamberlain as moderator. And now it's the former Prime Minister whose turn it is to speak again. And he says that he suspects that Hitler would most likely only make an offer specifically to France. Perhaps, says Halifax, but he still insists they must not send a flat refusal to the French. The argument has not been resolved at all in this cabinet. And as the meeting wraps up with a brief discussion on the position of the United States, and then chairs are pushed back, papers collected, war cabinet moves to leave, and as Halifax steps out into the corridor, he sees Alexander Cadogan, his permanent undersecretary at the Foreign Office, hovering, waiting for him. And as he nears him, he mutters, I can't work with Winston any longer. But before Cadogan can reply, there is a call from Churchill. Edward! And Halifax stops and turns as the Prime Minister hurries to him. And Churchill places a hand briefly on Halifax's elbow, part steering him away, part a kind of signal of intimacy. And this is a peace feeler of his own. And he leads him through number 10 to the enclosed garden at the rear. And only once they are there, alone, out of earshot, does Churchill then speak again. No one knows what was said, except that Halifax did give a bit of a report. He said that Winston was full of affection and basically says, don't resign.
But as you and I both know, Jim, at We Have Ways Festival last year, we did manage to get a glimpse into what may have been said in the Rose Garden.
Yes.
As those present exactly. Remember. It is fascinatingly dramatic, this. One thought that was crossing my mind while we were reading all that is a modern cabinet now. We'd have read about that in the paper the next day. It would have been leaked by everybody. In the modern style, that whole thing would have been leaked everywhere. It is fascinating that this remains. And the contents of the conversation of the Rose Garden would have been leaked by Halifax or by Churchill in the modern style.
But by Halifax saying, I can't work with Winston anymore, the threat is clear. He's losing his temper, he's fed up with this, and he's considering his position.
Yeah.
And if Halifax resigns...
Yeah, a proper blow to the government.
Well, it's probably the end of the government. It collapses, and that would then almost certainly usher in defeat. I mean, it's a domino effect. So him saying that is catastrophic. What Churchill is doing in the garden is being affectionate, saying, come on, we've been colleagues for a long time, you're a good chap, I need you on side. We have no idea what he's saying, but we're suspecting that it's words along to that effect. Meanwhile, back at Dunkirk, dusk is settling now on the kind of the first full day. They've managed to get, I think, 7,899 men lifted on that day, but it's just, it's not enough. The Germans are knocking at the door. The guns are getting ever closer. The pool of smoke is ominously thickening above Dunkirk. The sound of guns and Stukas diving and bombs exploding. Thousands upon thousands of hundreds of thousands of men, little black silhouettes huddling on the beaches, for 10 miles all the way down to Le Pan and beyond. And the situation looks absolutely terrible. And that night, the Belgians are going to surrender. Could it be any worse?
Well, find out in our next episode.
I don't know about you, but my heart's beating faster.
Well, I have to say, actually having their words and seeing their arguments laid out in front of you.
It's just amazing, isn't it?
It's quite amazing. It's quite incredible. And in the notes, everybody, Jim used a typeface that when you get those enormous blue books of the cabinet reports, they're in that typeface. It's a very, very peculiar flashback there to times looking at those.
Yep.
Anyway, if you've enjoyed this episode and really need to move on very, very quickly without adverts to the next one, you could always subscribe on our Apple channel, Officer Class, or you could become a Patreon member. And if you want to meet other people who know exactly what happened in that rose garden because they saw a sketch about it last year at We Have Waste Fest, come to We Have Waste Fest 5, V for Victory, put in the fun into funf, September the 12th to the 14th. Apologies for the hard sell, regular listeners, but we just want people to experience the best history weekend in the country, nay, in the free world, a history festival secured by Winston Churchill, taking Halifax into that garden in many ways. We will see you for our next episode. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
I'm Gordon Carrera.
And I'm David McCloskey.
Together, we're the co-hosts of another Goalhanger show called The Rest is Classified.
Here's that clip we mentioned earlier on.
When I look back on it now, you still see that, there's plans, there's memoranda, there's notifications, there's all these things, but they're never actually executed. They never actually kind of pull the trigger on anything, do they?
I'm a little bit of two minds on this because I agree with you that the theme of this episode really is a series of missed opportunities to get Osama bin Laden prior to 9/11.
Yeah.
But we should also note that once Tenant and the CIA understand that Osama bin Laden is coming for us, in particular after the East Africa bombings, there is a push to improve our collection and our understanding of Al-Qaeda pretty significantly. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of human sources who get recruited in this period. There's a lot more technical collection. Alex Station is beefed up to more than 40 people. There's a bunch of connections with foreign partners on Al-Qaeda that hadn't existed before. I mean, interestingly, there's a PDB, President's Daily Brief, in December the 4th of 1998, which is titled, quote, Bin Laden preparing to hijack U.S. aircraft and other attacks. Yeah. And so there's a lot of strategic warning, I think you could say, about what Al-Qaeda is up to. And yet there's an inability, I think, to translate that into practical efforts and operations to stop these attacks and to stop Al-Qaeda from ultimately carrying out 9/11.
If you want to hear the full episode, listen to The Rest is Classified wherever you get your podcasts.